Yep.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ken.
Nice to see everybody made it on another Sabbath. A cold Sabbath, as it is. It's cold up here, I can tell you that. Gary won't be joining us this evening, but we have Kelly and David and Dr. Ricks with us. And tonight we're going to discuss the Ark of the Covenant, and glad to see our viewers in the audience. So if you want to take us out.
Okay. This story is called Lost at Sea. A elderly couple are sitting together on an airplane flying to the far east out in the Pacific Ocean. Suddenly, over the public address system, the captain announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some very bad news. Our engines have ceased functioning. We're gliding. We'll be going down in a few minutes, though we have a lot of altitude to glide with. The good news is I can see an island below that we should be able to land on. The bad news is this island is uncharted. I'm unable to find it in any of our maps. So the odds are that we will never be rescued. We'll have to live on this island for a very long time, if not for the rest of our lives." And the couple says, they're shocked. And she asks, "Did we turn the oven off?" And he says, "Yes, we did, I'm sure." "What about our life insurance policies? Did we pay them?" "Of course we did." And then she asked her husband, "Did you pay the IRS? Did you send your check to the IRS?" "I forgot to send off the check." "Thank heaven. They'll find us for sure."
You're safe.
One more similar one. This is called the Moses and the Miracle. Moses was in the Egyptian ghetto and things were terrible, and Pharaoh wouldn't even speak to him. The rest of the Israelites were mad at him because the overseers were making him work harder. Suddenly a booming voice, and it says, "You, Moses, heed me. I have good news and bad news." Moses is staggered by this booming voice. "You, Moses, you're going to lead the people of Israel from bondage. If Pharaoh refuses to release you, I'll smite the Egyptians with a rain of frogs. You, Moses, will lead the people of Israel to the promised land. If Pharaoh blocks your way, I'll smite Egypt with a plague of locusts. You, Moses, will lead the people of Israel to freedom, safety. If Pharaoh's army pursues you, I'll part the waters of the Red Sea and open them wide for you to walk to the promised land." Moses was stunned and stammered, "That's fantastic. I can't believe it. But what's the bad news? You, Moses, must write the environmental impact study."
It took another 40 years.
Get a lot of good lawyers and good paperwork. Well, today we're going to discuss a subject which, here's what Church Rumor has said for years, that one of GTA's assistants was a very well-known Jewish fellow back when the church's headquarters were in Pasadena, which is very close to Hollywood, as you know. And he knew a lot of the major producers out there in Hollywood. And GTA had mentioned him several times that the Ark of the Covenant, if it's ever found, it could trigger end-time events. So he mentioned it to some of his producer buddies, And out of it came the famous movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. And probably the ark that you see in the movie probably is a fairly close resemblance to what the ark really looked like. And remember, in the end, the bad guys, or some of them, look inside the ark and they horribly die. That actually happened. You read 1 Samuel, I think it's in 1 Samuel 6, 70 people did. So actually the movie was to that extent. Now the rest of it, of course, was all adventure and, you know, high drama made up by Hollywood writers. But the Ark of the Covenant being holy and special, that part was accurate. And if you read Exodus 37 and the surrounding chapters, you'll see the details of how beautifully gold-laden, and I think the parts of it were solid gold, like the angels, and it had brass rings and special gold-plated poles to carry it in, because nobody could touch the ark, including the Levites. Only Levites could carry it, and they had to use these poles with little rings. So they would stick the poles and rings, but nobody could actually touch the ark, because it was a model that Moses was given on Mount Sinai of God's throne. And as a model, it was holy, and it was in the Holy of Holies that only the high priest could come in once a year to sprinkle blood on and do certain other rituals for the forgiveness of the sins of Israel. But it was that holy, and actually this is part of the story that most don't know. If he did things he wasn't supposed to do in there, they had a rope on his leg. He would, you know, when God was with Israel, when God or his angel was there, he would be struck dead, and they would have to drag him out because they couldn't go in there. Only one person could go in once a year. So this is that special ark. And I want to mention part of the story that I think is interesting. In 1 Samuel 4, verse 2 through 4, the Israelites had bad leaders. The sons of the prophet were very bad, and they were in charge, Hophnius and Phinehas. And they were evil men. And they went to battle, and they lost the battle, and 4,000 men were killed. So when the elders of Israel got back together, they said, well, we've got to do something. And they said, why don't we get the Ark of the Covenant, you know, out of the tabernacle. They remembered when the Ark led them, Joshua, in the victory at Jericho, and they thought, wow, God would not let anything happen to the Ark of the Covenant. We can manipulate God or force God to give us the victory. So those two went in there and desecrated the tabernacle, brought the ark out, we assume with the poles, of course, and they went into this big battle. And when you read it, you'll see that when they got to the camp of the Israelites, they all shouted with joy because we've got the Ark of the Covenant on our side. And we might discuss this for a minute. They were more struck by having the ark that represent God's throne with them than the God who's behind the ark with them. You know, they got the horse backwards. Instead of trying to get God on their side, they got the ark that represents God's throne on their side.
People always want something physical to look to. You know, if you remember when they went in and they said, we want you to be our king. He said, well, God's your king. And, you know, they always want something physical. And I don't think that's really changed a whole lot. The ark was so important that when God said, don't touch it or you'll die, that one time when they were carrying it, the ark slid and the man reached up, put his hand on it to keep it from falling, and he died. And I always looked at the ark like I look at the Bible. God says you don't change one jot or one tittle, you know, and that's how important that ark was, and that's how important the Bible and the words of God are, that you don't touch them. When you go and stand on, when Moses went and stood in front of God on the mountain, he said, take off your shoes because the ground you're standing on is holy because I'm here. So when he wrote the Bible or had men write the Bible, and he repeated the Ten Commandments more than once, he repeated the holy days more than once. We're not to touch those things.
And that's a good point.
And one thing, and what happened when you read it was the Philistines heard the Israelites, and they said, "Oh, what's going on? A great God has entered their camp." And the Philistines were frightened because they had heard about all the wonderful things Jehovah, the God of Israel, we might call him the eternal God of Israel. They had heard that name, the God of the Israelites, what power he had, and they were, let's say, scared. But they said, we're going to fight like men. We're not going to lose in spite of it. And I think the main thing is God was not going to be manipulated by an Israelite nation that had turned toward bad behavior and led by two men who were definitely desecrating the sacrifices. When you read the previous chapters, they were desecrating the sacrifices of God, which is sinning directly against God. And God was not going to give them the victory. And as one writer said, in commentary, they said, well, God won't let anything happen to his ark. God didn't need to give them the victory to take care of the ark. God could take care of the ark himself. They lost 40,000 men in a total defeat. And I want to mention something here that we maybe should discuss for a few minutes. You all know that America, religious freedom was the first of the Bill of Rights, and America was a very religious country, based on their understanding of the Bible. I'm not saying it was complete, but I think we could all agree that if you looked at the world in the 1776 and a few years after that, America was clearly the most biblical place in the world and the place that had the most religious freedom. And that's why the original pilgrims came. They didn't really come for prosperity. Now, many people did come for prosperity. They came for religious freedom. And a lot of Sabbath keepers came to America. And America was pretty... And for instance, here's some things that I did not know until some years later. Not until after the Civil War did most Americans even bother with Christmas. Christmas was outlawed in quite a few places as being too pagan and too worldly. And even Halloween was outlawed in some places as being too worldly and pagan. I didn't even realize that. Most people have no idea. When George Washington desperately needed a victory, and he did that Christmas night attack across the Potomac River, it wasn't that hard for him to do it because most of his people didn't keep Christmas. They were quite sober, and the Hessian, mercenaries across the river were drunk from Christmas. It was the perfect timing.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot of that stuff was the English didn't bring it over, but people from the Celts and the Irish and from up in that area, they brought those kind of holidays or traditions with them, and that's when all that stuff started.
And the Hessians were Germans, so they brought their German culture over with them as well.
Yep.
I find it interesting, and back to the Ark for a second, something I thought of a minute ago, but I didn't want to interrupt, was it's interesting Adolf Hitler claimed to worship all the Norse gods. At the same time, he had a team scouring northern Africa trying to locate that Ark of the Covenant.
That and other things. He was trying to locate other things, too, at that time, if I remember right. But that was one of them for sure.
I mean, he believed all these artifacts had power, and that's what he wanted was power to ensure his power.
And maybe the future beast, who will be Hitler-like, but probably more charismatic and smarter, he might want to get the temple with the Ark in it. But, well, anyway, I guess we can talk about that later. But there's a certain parallel you could come up with. But by the one thing about Christmas most don't know, the reason Christmas and Halloween got so big in America is because the department stores in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, turn of the century, it was so profitable. It was money that drove it.
Right. In fact, most of the stuff that we do now started by marketing during that period of time for stores. But I'm really dragging this off now, so let's get back to the Ark.
But the other point I want to bring about the Ark of the Covenant, God did not give them the victory. And then I thought about it, and about somewhere in the late 60s into the 1970s, during that time period, America kicked prayer out of the schools, legalized abortion, got involved in the sexual revolution. Academia, government, and the media and Hollywood turned against the Bible and religion and traditional values. And during that same period, 1974, I think that's the year, America lost its first war, the Vietnam War. Is that a coincidence? Just like what happened in 1 Samuel 4.
You know, I find it interesting that in many school districts now, they're being forced to carry some book of Satan or something to that effect in the libraries. It doesn't mean the kids have to read it. It's not being forced on them. But the Church of Satan has got a lobby group going. And there are certain school districts that are now including this book in their library. How far we've gone from a moment of silence and pledge to the flag. You know, I remember being in schools and things where the Ten Commandments were in common areas. And nobody had a problem with it.
Did you hear about the guy who was upset? His daughter came home and said she had to do an assignment about Islam, and I don't remember all the details. And then he was in Maryland, but I guess he called the school district and they said, we don't care. He's a veteran. He had just finished seeing what Islam does over in Iraq. And they said, we don't care. Your daughter has to do the assignment. And they will not allow the Ten Commandments in that school, but they'll teach the kids about Islam. It's part of multiculturalism.
Yeah, everything is backwards.
Yep. Evil is good and good is evil. I mean, it's predicted. So, and we're there.
Isaiah 55, 56, it says, all those who choose to do what is right shall become prey.
Yeah, you can feel that too. You can feel that people that make the right decision are the ones that are abused and that are, ostracized in today's world.
And while I know you could say that Vietnam wasn't a total loss and all that. So I do know the other side. We did win the Cold War, so it wasn't all bad, and that was just maybe a lost battle in the Cold War. But that was still the first war that America had ever lost. And when you think about American history, even when Britain was a superpower and America was a small startup, we still won. We won the American Revolution, won the War of 1812. The British might call it a stalemate, but really it was an American victory. And supposedly we were outnumbered in several big Indian wars and the Mexican-American War, and America won. And people like Napoleon and others said everything America did just seemed to work out.
So what you're kind of saying is when instead of the Ark, but when America carried God in high esteem, we were successful. And when we stopped doing that, we're where we're at now.
I realize
I feel like we're sliding right off. We're sliding right out of favor with God, and it's easy to see why.
I mean, I'm not saying I know we're not a theocracy. In Israel, it was clear you had prophets, theocracy, and everything was clear. It's a little cloudier, but I still, I say America was blessed in the past. You go through American history, all kinds of things worked out for America. Now, even what I just heard recently on the news, and I'm not sure they are right about it, but they say on our bombing of ISIS, we have concluded that we're not doing enough bombing to get them out of Syria. We're going to kind of concede that because they've been gaining and gaining, even though we've been bombing them. They should be falling back, running and hiding in caves, but they're gaining. We're going to just try to stop them from taking all of Iraq, which I guess we can do. But that's all we're going to do. That's not much of a victory, is it?
Now, in the current situation, we're not going to get rid of them. We may be able to hold them at stalemate, but you're not going to be able to get rid of them in the current conditions because they're too entrenched.
But also, it's like Vietnam. In Vietnam, we lost because the press, and we lost on the home front, and the press undermined the war effort. We lost because we lost the will to fight. I would argue if they pulled out the B-24 bombers and just really laid it into ISIS, I mean, big-time bombing, saturation bombing, we can make a difference. It's like we don't have the will to win, just like Vietnam. I'm not saying it exactly parallel, but there's a pattern. God's not with us, and we don't seem to do the right thing.
There's a scripture that says that the young men will be called out to fight, and they will not go. And I think that because our national pride, but a lot of our young men go out there and do their job, and then they get themselves arrested and court-martialed for doing what they thought was right in the field.
I think when you have God not being worshipped the way he should be in a country, then that country turns to where you don't care about anybody but yourself. And when you get to that position, what do I care what's going over in the Middle East? I don't care. It doesn't have an effect on me, and you can't convince people that it does. When something happens over here like 9/11, well, that was just one incident, okay? Big deal. It was New York. It's not down here where I live. So that's their problem. And so, it gets harder and harder to get people to care enough to put their life on the line. And so,
when the Philistines took the ark, when they took that from Israel, I mean, don't you think that? I mean, they would have lost they would have been worried about losing that, and they may have lost their will to go to battle without it.
well, man, basically, God was gone from them.
Right. Exactly. So
Go ahead.
I think it was a similar effect, is what I'm getting at.
Right.
And I think the high priest's wife had a baby. It's in that same section, into chapter 4 and 5. And his name she named the baby Ichabod because he was born just right after that. And it means that God has forsaken us. And I believe that's what's a terrible name, Ichabod. But anyway, God has forsaken us. That's what the Israelites felt like. And at least temporarily that was true. Now, whenever they repented sufficiently, God would then send them another good leader, and it was that up and down cycle, up and down, up and down. But at least for that generation, that was true. And if you read 1 Samuel 5, you'll find out it didn't work out so well for the Philistines, because what God did was it went to 3 of their cities, and in those 3 cities, each one at a time. First, they put them there next to their fish god Dagon, and the idol just smashed. God just smashed the pagan idol when it was next to the ark. And the people start getting these painful hemorrhoids and cancers and suffering and dying. Listen, the God of Israel is mad. They move it to the next city, and the next city would have the same thing until they said, we got to get rid of this thing, for the God of Israel kills us all. So they put it on a cart, and they arranged it so they know that if the cows went back where they're supposed to go, all this was coincidence. And of course, the cows went back to Israel. Eventually, David brings it back to Jerusalem, and it's a happy story the way it ends. But it shows that God was able to take care of his own ark. He didn't need the Israelites to help him.
Back to the other point, when that happened, to Kelly's point, in New York, people were like, that happened to them up there, that's not us. But when you go back to World War II, the bombing happened in Hawaii. They weren't even a state at that time. And look at the national pride, what we did as a nation, and how we rallied around. Everybody was on the same page, it seemed like. And now we're all over the place. And what we teach our children, the example set to the children. I went to Chuck E. Cheese last week, and they have armed security in Chuck E. Cheese. Guy walking around with a gun on his hip. And I asked him why they needed armed security. It's because the parents brawl.
Not the kids.
He stuck Oh my goodness.
There's got to be a YouTube video somewhere.
There's got to be. I'll bet you there is. I should have had one when my kids were young, because I remember my daughter, she'd get up in them tubes. We'd say it's time to go. She wouldn't go. My wife would, she'd throw her shoes off, go crawling through them tubes after my daughter. Man, I wish I would have had a camera phone back then. That would have been hilarious.
My wife played in the tubes with the little one. Yeah, she's not much bigger than those little ones anyway, but she was up crawling around in the tubes with them.
It's dangerous at Chuck E. Cheese.
That's pretty sad. But I mean, without the country being without a single ideology, a Christian, ideology, kind of driving this country. I mean, there's no. I mean, what are you fighting for? What are you fighting for? You can't fight for decency. You can't fight for, to help. I mean, if you have no principles, what are you fighting for?
Well, that's in Christianity, the core principle is servitude.
Right.
That you're a servant, and so as a servant, you don't hesitate to throw your life on the line for the person that's in the foxhole with you. Nowadays, it'd be like each of you be trying to push the other one up in front, rather than somebody stepping up to take the lead.
Right. World War II, we went to help rid and support our allies and rid the world of an evil driving force.
Yes.
And that
go ahead, Dave.
That same evil driving force is going to come back around, but this time it's going to have a smile on its face. Yeah. Hitler looked angry all the time. It's easy to see evil, but when they're smiling and patting you on the back while doing the exact same thing to you, people are not going to identify it.
Right, right.
And in today's society, it's about understanding why they are the way they are, and having that understanding and being tolerant of them. So it makes it much easier for them to do what they want to do with the rest of the world.
Right. I remember GTA had there's a book called "Is God Tolerant?" It's excellent.
Well, it's a lot easier to stab somebody in the back while you're giving them a hug.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yes.
It's amazing that the Ark of the Covenant was maybe 4 foot long and 1.5 foot or so, 2 foot. 2 foot high or so, and they focused on that instead of the driving power behind it. Some people, especially like Hitler, like if he found it, like if he was able to find it, it would work for him. Work for him.
It's an old Chinese adage. He says, "A young man asked me to show him." Did we lose him?
I'm still here.
I'm still here.
Old Chinese adage said, a young man asked the monk where to find wisdom, and the monk pointed to the temple and he studied his hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of what they did with that ark.
Yeah. We ought to look maybe at the spiritual meaning. With Dave and Ken, would you all like to go into the spiritual meaning that the book of Hebrews covers regarding those aspects of the temple?
Yeah, I'm going to head to Hebrews 4 and get some spectacles. And we'll start in verse 14 of Hebrews 4. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Christ understands all of our temptations. He got sunburned. He scraped his hands, stepped on a nail or a rock or things, and he was tempted in every way. The ark represents the ark that's in God's kingdom, that physical ark, to help us to focus on the things that were in the ark as well. So we should always be looking to Christ and past the physical things. I guess the next scripture would be Romans 8.
I mean, it's Hebrews 8, you mean?
Excuse me, Hebrews 8. I'll do that. You think Ken would like to read some of that?
See if I can bring it up here.
He's pretty techie. I have to actually hold a book.
It's 8.
8, yes, sir.
8 or 9.
8,
Eight,
verse 1
eight.
and 2, I think. Is verse
Oh
1.
yeah, verses 1 and 2. Okay. It says now this is the main point of the things we were saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord erected, not man.
You know, when you think about the Ark of the Holy of Holies, you know, represented God's throne, and Moses was told to make a model of God's throne. And when Christ died, at the moment he died, the big covering that kept the holy separated from the Holy of Holies ripped. And I think the church people realized that was a sign that we could go directly to God's throne, because the real high priest and the real Ark of the Covenant, which is, you know, God's throne, is now available through prayer.
Yep. So if just anybody says that the way through Christ leads through them, is you might want to avoid them at all costs.
Yeah.
If a man comes to you and says you can only get there through what that man says, you're talking to the wrong man.
I've had ministers say that.
And by the way, technically in the days of the Israelites, they had to go through the high priest to get to God.
Right. But our only high priest now,
Yeah.
our high priest now is Jesus Christ. You don't need a man to go to. You go directly to God the Father through Jesus Christ. And it's simple to do. You get on your knees and humble yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's like the ark was a physical thing. I mean, it's still very valuable, you know, gold and very, you know, great workmanship and precious, and it represented God's throne, which makes it a sacred thing. But it's still just a physical thing. The true spiritual worship, we have to go to the real thing, with God's help, of course. And then I'm going to read Hebrews 9:1, next couple of verses. Obviously, the book of Hebrews is talking to Jewish Christians. He's trying to keep from sliding away back to Judaism, because from their point of view, see, if you were a Gentile, you'd either have to go back to the raw paganism and superstition and all that. But if you were a Jew, you could say, well, I can just leave the church, but I'm still, you know, with God. You know how it would be a little easier to backslide and get out of some of the pressure from your Jewish countrymen. So that's one of the themes of the book of Hebrews. And then he's telling them that they don't, the real high priest is Christ. And in Hebrews 9, verse 1, we assume it's Paul, but it might have been Luke or someone else who wrote this. Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle made, the first wherein was candlesticks and a table, showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, or Holy of Holies, which had the golden censer, the ark of the covenant, overlaid round about with gold, wherein was a golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded in the tabernacles, and the tables of the covenant. You know, they had the Ten Commandment tablets. And over it the cherubims, which were, you know, made of gold, glory and shadowing the mercy seat, which we cannot now speak of particulars. Now these things were thus ordained, and the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. But then he goes on to explain that now Christ has done it once and for all, and we can do the real thing, or the deeper spiritual thing now. And maybe Kelly and Ken, are you all, maybe you could read 2 Thessalonians 2, because there's one more item that I think we should discuss.
Okay. That was 3 and 4. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
So someone's going to come along and claim to be God and sit in some temple, whether it's a makeshift or a permanent temple, claiming to be God. I wonder if he'll have, or if I wonder if they'll, make some counterfeit version of the ark to do that.
Well, one of the questions that was asked was, what would happen if the Ark of the Covenant was found? And I actually posed that question on Google and come up with some interesting articles. And again, this is all speculation, but knowing human nature, first of all, when something like that is found, you immediately have a split into camps. One camp is that this is the Ark of the Covenant, hallelujah, joy. And the other camp is, this is fake. This is a fraud. This doesn't exist. And you have things break down into those two camps. And then you have splitters of those camps into those that, look at it like, well, maybe it could be, but it's not really significant. And those that, it probably is, and therefore we need to recover it for ourselves because we don't want other people to get their hands on it because of the power that's in it. And the whole thing becomes just foolishness, because the Ark of the Covenant was a thing that God had commanded to be built and was built, but as we were talking about earlier, the power is not in the object, it's God. And mankind has always, down through the ages, when you look at emperors or pharaohs or people who put themselves in the position of God, people who call themselves God on earth, God's representative on earth, they tend to set themselves up as God. They tend to have a throne that they sit on and people come to and kneel down and kiss their rings and bow before them, and they act as God. And, when you have something like that, there very possibly could be somebody who would counterfeit the Ark of the Covenant. We have a description of it. I mean, you got Raiders of the Lost Ark. You just take that and build that, and everybody will believe that's the real Ark because that's what it looks like, obviously. It was on the movies. We all know that's true. And so they build that, and here's what people expect, and they see this, and they see this person sitting on it or touching it and nothing happening, and obviously he must be a man of God, that he can touch this artifact that was known to kill people for, if you touched it or looked into it, and here he is sitting on it or touching it and, claiming to be God. And it would boost his position to people's eyes that are looking at the wrong thing. If you're looking at objects and saying objects have power, then you'll be fooled by it. And that's what I thought about being deceived.
Well, and the other.
Go ahead, David.
The other thing is maybe this man does touch it, and another man touches it and drops dead.
Very
or seemingly drops dead.
That's, yeah.
Backed up by the devil's power.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because the whole world's going to believe a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even just the stuff that I've read about history, and you go back and you look at some of the politics that was involved in leadership, especially in the Roman Catholic Church with the popes and things, and some of the things that they did to each other. It was not uncommon at all for one to try and poison another to gain a position. So it'd be quite easy to see somebody who, especially with our modern day biological weapons and things to rig it so that he knew exactly how to touch it or had the antidote to be able to touch it, and somebody else touches it, and some biological agent takes somebody out. And it could be just as gruesome as, Raiders was, with body parts melting and skin and flesh falling off bone. It would be pretty convincing.
I never thought of that.
I wonder.
You have an exotic imagination.
Well, when you start speculating, you can go a lot of places with it. And with human nature, people can be very cruel especially when they're trying to gain power, because that's what it comes down to. They're trying to gain power, and they're trying to fool people to get them to support them.
You need to lay out the late night radio shows, man.
I come up with this on my own.
Oh, that's even scarier yet.
But one of the things I was reading, it was talking about and this was coming from the question was asked, and it was Jewish people that were answering the question, what if the ark was found? What would it mean? And they pretty much said it pretty much wouldn't mean a whole lot, because there's a belief that the ark was built to carry God from the wilderness to the temple, and once it was arrived in Jerusalem in the temple, then God was released in the temple. That's where God's presence is now, is in the temple or in Jerusalem. So there is no need for the ark anymore. So it's basically, they look at it as it was a transportation device to get God to Jerusalem. And so now that he's here, it's not that big a thing. But now you're going to have. Go ahead, Dr. X.
There's a rumor. Well, it's mentioned in some that some priests, when the Babylonians were taking the temple, they dug a hole in the sacred mountain, took the ark in there, sealed themselves in so that nobody would know where they were, and then they all went, died in there with the ark. If archaeologists dig it up, Jewish archaeologists dig it up, they've been digging around there. If they were to find it and it looked legit, I'm just saying, would the nation of Israel feel an obligation to build a temple around it?
I think there would be some who want to. I mean, there's some who want to now. So I think that would give them a little boost in wanting to get it built. Yeah, I think you would still have those who would question whether it's authentic or not, because they don't want to stir the pot. They don't want to go to war. I think you would have the Muslims and Palestinians in the area who would start calling for holy war again. I mean, it's not like they don't call for it every day anyway, but they would, with the ark being found, they would again, start calling for, because number one, they would have to be digging around the Temple Mount and find the ark. And if they found it there, then that would be, you're digging around, you're desecrating holy land, and so that would cause it. And then the fact that it was the Ark of the Covenant, that would bring them to want to go to war. So you'd have the Palestinians trying to want to go to war. You'd have the people in Israel who'd want to grab the ark and say, hey, okay, now's the time. Let's do away with them. Let's wipe them out, because we know the ark can do that. So you'd have that section of people who wanted to do that. You'd have those who want to hide it away and store it so it can be studied, and so they can be absolutely sure that it's really the ark before they go anywhere. So I think even if it was found, I think you would find that it probably would disappear again, and it would be kept under locks, and the people would be breaking into such the different groups, the splinter groups, that you'd have the same thing you have today. Those who want to, they march. There's a group now that march ever so often to try to lay the cornerstone of the temple on a regular basis. And so I think you still have that same kind of things going on, except now the world would know that possibly the Ark of the Covenant has been found, and that where is it at? Where is it hidden at? Israel has it hidden. You'd have those who want to force Israel to give it up so it could be studied. You'd have universities, kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was a lot of controversy with those. Other universities saying, hey, we want to study them. Let us have a look at them. And it took a lot of negotiation to even let certain people even come in outside to be able to study those scrolls. So I think you'd have the same thing with the Ark of the Covenant. If it was found and produced, I think there'd be a lot of skepticism. There'd be a lot of those who would believe it, and it would become fanatical about it, and kind of the same thing that's going on today. But once you have the man of perdition who comes forward and sets himself up as God, then there's a lot of history that shows that a lot of objects are given the power of worship to give the power to that person who possesses them. And so if he could have that, he would use that to booster his position as God. And
If the
use it
power
for
was in, if the power was in the ark, when the Palestinians took it back in Samuel, why didn't they just attack Israel right on the spot? We got it. We can't lose. Instead, they ran back to show people they had it. One, two. There's a rumor that's been bounced around for years. I don't know how true it is. That there's a bishop in Ethiopia who claims to have that.
Yep, that's been going. That goes back to this. I mean, the first time I heard about it was in the 70s. I was a little kid when I heard that one.
Yeah.
Well, the question I have is, if they find it, we don't know. They could find it. What if they find it there? Who owns it?
I never thought of that issue.
So, who owns it? The Jews are going to claim it's ours. If it's sitting in the Pope may want to claim it's his. That he has a right to it.
By the way, I just thought of something, Ken. I've tried to interrupt you. That could explain why the beast, if he has an alliance with some super pope in the future, could claim he has a right to come to that temple where the ark is, because the pope says it really should be ours.
Right. Right, and if there and there's also the Muslim factor that could be pulled into this, because they claim to go back and have some of the same patriarchs that the Christians and the Jews have. So who knows? I mean, first of all, they're going to fight over who owns it. If it's not directly found, if it's found at all, but if it's not directly found in Israel, there's going to be a battle over who gets to keep it, who gets to own it, and who gets to MRI it and X-ray it and prove that it's the right acacia wood or whatever. They're going to be doing that for who knows how long, but there's going to be a bit of a disagreement on where it belongs and who owns it. And if there is, and once there is this, the beast shows up, he's going to want to make claim. He's going to make claims on it. Obviously, he would do that. And plus, not to mention all the countless Sunday preachers that are going to make, pilgrimages to Israel, if that's where it ends up, and claim that they have something to, do with it. You'll see them on Sunday say, I sat with the Ark of the Covenant, and I'll come up and I'll heal you if you want to drop something in the plate. I mean, all that's the sort of stuff we'll have to deal with. But I mean, it would be. I think it would not be a minor thing. It would be a huge moment in the history, especially in our history of the world, if it ever does get found. It would really throw it would stir the pot. Let me put it that way. It wouldn't be like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, finding or the controversy over that the shroud they claim is Christ and all that. This would be major, much more major, I think.
Now, just because of speculation, we are speculating some here. Now, imagine this man who goes into the temple, and at the moment he declares himself God, if he produced the Ark of the Covenant.
I hadn't thought of that. No one knew it was there until he went in there and showed them it was there, and he's the one that brought it there. Or at least that's what he'd tell them.
Right.
Or God gave it to him as a place to sit. No, he's God. Never mind. Whatever.
I think what we're saying is, no matter what they say, don't buy it.
He gifted himself.
But from a worldly point of view, I can see this logic. What made the temple holy? It was God, who lived in the temple. And he said, "Look to the temple when you repent." And when Solomon built the temple, actually God's glow and all that was there, and we assume he was on the seat on the Ark of the Covenant, sitting on that throne and glowing. So in other words, God actually filled the temple in the Holy of Holies, sitting on the Ark when they originally built it, of course. So that's what made the temple special. It's the God, not the gold, but the God who's there. So if they find the Ark of the Covenant, it could be an excuse to call a building the house of God, sacred, holy, all that special stuff, which could fulfill Bible prophecy. So something to think of as the years come on.
Sure.
Yep. Something to
I
be
think
aware of and be on guard for in case it comes up. Just to know that's a possibility.
I think as Christians and God's people, the thing we always need to keep focused on is it's not about objects or men, or it's about God and His Word. And that as long as we don't get caught up in these things, I mean, so they find the Ark of the Covenant. You know, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it would be interesting. I'll be curious, but it will mean nothing to me as far as my belief in God and what I do. And that's what people tend to do. They tend to get bent out of shape and lose their faith because science comes in and says, oh, this is not real, or that didn't happen because we have this evidence. And, you know, we tend to lose sight in those cases of the true power of God is, you know, that He can't be contained in objects. And because man says something doesn't mean it's so.
I'd like to go back to something Kelly said a little while ago. He said he's speculating. I think that's what we're supposed to do. You know, that's just thinking. And if you read your Bible and you don't speculate, you don't think, you don't look around you, it's not going to be real to you, and you're not going to come up with answers. So I appreciate it when you speculate, even if Ken's going to pick on you.
I don't pick on anybody for speculating.
And when he's getting you, when he's getting you, I'm safe.
I think speculation is good because it does exercise the mind. I think the thing you have to really be careful of is that you don't let speculation turn into doctrine or into belief, because that it is a speculation we don't know. And when you put more on it, that's when you can be deceived. And that's what we all have to remember.
Yeah, when you let speculation become a kernel that you have to hold on to, it can only happen the way you speculate it. Like these preachers do that speculate the end of the earth or when Christ is returning, and then they end up not coming back, and then they re-speculate, I missed it by 6 months, and then they re-speculate. That's taking speculation to putting it into a religious point, you know, where you're worship the speculation. But when you speculate to see how things could go down and how they could turn out, and just to make you aware of these things, then that is healthy, and it's just, you know, to know that that's a possibility, especially when you take into account human nature, when you take into account the political atmosphere of the world, right? All these things, and you put that into perspective of Bible prophecy and God's, the way He operates, the way God, you put that all together, then it gives you a logical, you know, foresight in how things could happen to fulfill prophecy. So you're not on your heels, and your lamp's not without oil at the wrong time.
But also, each one of us are going to speculate differently. So when we do that, the other guys get thoughts, and it helps us to come up with solid doctrine.
Yep. I always think in terms of how things have happened in the past and how people's human nature reacted to that, and that doesn't change much. So I apply that to anything that I look at as far as how things could turn out if something happens one way or the other. Is human nature doesn't change a whole lot. People are greedy, and people are power hungry, and, you know, to an extent, and they're going to go that route most of the time. But you know what? We really went long tonight. Does anybody have anything else? I think our viewers are starting to look. It's nap time. Some of them, anyway. The East Coasters.
Maybe we could mention just real briefly. We're thinking about doing the first seal, the white horse, for next week. The seals from the Book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm. And just to warn everyone, there might be a little speculation in some.
Yeah, Book of Revelation speculation.
And how it pertains to the world we live in today, there might be a little bit of. But yeah, I think that'd be great. So, if that's it, we'll say good night. We thank everyone for coming. Thank everyone who sends in ideas. We love them, and we apply them, and we bring them to the program, and we appreciate that. And keep them coming. any way you can communicate at Line Upon Line. No, I can't remember my email address. I can't remember.
My passwords.
Yeah, I know. I think it's 2810 at gmail.com, or just contact us on our Facebook page, the Line Upon Line Facebook page, and put it in there, and we'd be more than happy to hear from y'all. So good night, everyone. Good night, gentlemen.
Good night.
Always seek the kingdom, everybody, and have a great Sabbath.